Kia ora, Catherine.
Bruce.
You just come back from the Bolivian conference for the UN. How was that?
I have. It was, in a word, intense.
Yeah.
The topics we were discussing were very big. In fact, probably the biggest one facing humanity right now, right? Which is climate crisis, mitigation, adaptation. It's pretty much the headliner issue for the world right now.
And how did you get to be at this conference?
Actually, it depends where you want to put the starting line to how I got into the scene, which was back in 2005. I got a fellowship with the United Nations for 5 months based in Geneva in Switzerland at their HQ there, the headquarters there, learning all about human rights, particularly focused on indigenous human rights, all the mechanisms and the instruments and the ways to protect and promote human rights. And of course that's very closely tied with business and industry, with the environment, social sector, everything, pretty much. So it was, it began there. And then once you get into that sort of network, and you're really passionate about it, you just naturally just get opportunities sort of magnetized to you, right? That they just keep on coming. And I was working for my tribes up home, my Māori peoples up home, and of course we have Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and there were very strong parallels between our fight and our campaign for justice and fairness and the environment under a treaty frame here in Aotearoa, and the global mechanisms to protect indigenous rights. And I got a lot of work that way. Yeah.
So did they talk about the new IPCC report?
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, yes, that was actually a key component of the conference in Bolivia. Yeah. So in Bolivia we had indigenous representatives from all over the world come, as well as what we call friendly states came with and met with us, and we dialogued together. And there were relatively few friendly states, which makes you think, okay, what are the rest? They must be unfriendly states by comparison. These are the kind of in-house jokes we got to make it kind of sort of humorous, otherwise it gets quite depressing if you're always thinking about the constant barrage of resistance from the rest of the world against what indigenous peoples want to achieve for the good of all humanity, right? All humanity.
I'm sure the Indians were from one of the friendly states.
They weren't there. There was a European representative, Estonia, and what was that one beginning with B? Not Belgium, the other one. Anyway, I'm not a geography major. I've got a law degree. It was different. We did have a Chinese representative. We did have Canada, and of course the Bolivian government was represented there. But we really needed way more people from different states to be representing this.
So you're talking climate crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking climate change. I mean, people find it hard to keep up with changes of terminology. We used to talk about global warming.
Yeah.
So what's with climate crisis?
Does anyone know the Guardian newspaper outlet? George Monbiot, who writes quite a bit for the Guardian. Well, George, you can look him up. I can give you some links to all sorts of information later too, if you guys are real nerdy and want to follow up, like me. But George Monbiot said, calling this situation of ours climate change is sort of like saying there's a marauding, invading army coming and they're just sort of coming for dinner. It's really downplaying the gravity of the situation, right? And it's not, from a Māori perspective, it's not tika. Tika meaning it's not right, it's not correct, it's not accurate. It would be more correct to say it is a crisis situation, it is an emergency situation. And in fact, the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report, their special report, talking about 1.5 degrees temperature and how if we can keep it, the global average temperature since the industrial era, if we can keep the warming globally around the planet to that, we will still have severe effects for all of humanity. But if we let it go beyond that, like to 2 degrees, 3, 4 degrees, you don't even want to go there. Just imagining what that would be like is just apocalyptic. So they've brought out the special report and they've told us all about 1.5 degrees and all the effects in our climate. In fact, it's not out in the future. It's actually been happening for decades, the effects of these increases in temperature. And one of the headliners of the report was quite disturbing for people who haven't been following this and paying attention, which is we have 12 years as a planet to come together and mobilise with the most radical, unorthodox, whatever label you want to put on it, responses technologically, socially, culturally, environmental protection-wise, everything, because if we don't, we're going to way overshoot the 1.5. Now that's, you've got to understand, reports that come out from the United Nations are already suppressing, the hard truth. They sort of, if you can imagine, there's all these scientists that are negotiating at ends of the spectrum. Some are really like, nah, she'll be right. I'm talking layperson's language. You imagine the scientists saying, nah, she'll be right. And at this end, they're going, bam, it's crazy, it's insanely urgent. And they take months and months to negotiate the text of a report somewhere in the grey middle area zone. So it's never actually like a precautionary approach, sort of. They never really want to go to the urgency because they're afraid they'll scare the horses. That's you and me and everyone. They're afraid that the public will just freak out and then there'll be like, riots and upheaval, whatever they imagine there will be.
Well, that was a bit scary because one of the articles you sent in that email talked about like climate genocide.
Yep.
And I'm not sure if that's like, we're both on the Climate Change Trust here, and you're saying we need to change the narrative, but I'm a bit concerned that if we talk that language and we really up the degree of what the crisis is facing us, we'll just scare people.
Yeah.
And there'll be no, they'll just think, oh well, it's all over. Why bother? I'll just have fun.
Yeah,
that is
a very normal thing that I hear people say. We can't, and that, like I said, that's what these scientists, that's how they build, create and construct their reports. They're like, no, don't tell the whole truth, so dumb it down a bit. Yeah. But if you think over the long term, that's what's been happening the whole way. And the reason we haven't figured out really our solutions to what is now a crisis is because they've dumbed down the truth the whole way. They've never told us the full truth, so we've never responded to the truth. We've been responding to something less. You know what I mean? And that's point one. Point two, it's too late to talk about, we can't tell the truth, what if it scares everyone? It's already out there. Now that we have this thing called, here's another thing that brings in like anthropology and social, psychology and all that sort of stuff. For every period in history of revolutionary moments, right, you will always see an increase in communications technology, right? Maybe they start off with smoke signals, drums way back, or which direction, way back then. And then they move to getting shipping and cavings and caving paintings, and then they moved to writing, and then they had Morse code, the phone, basic computing. We've got the internet. It's like you can tap into the consciousness of the world. There is nothing you can't find out there now. So you can't hide stuff. Like I've got a son, he's 17 years old, and because I'm in the work, the mahi that I do, sometimes we have a chat. And so I'm quite transparent and open with him about the state of the world as I know it from my area of expertise. And I tell you, he's like, Mum, yeah, I know.
Yeah. So how does he respond?
You'd be surprised how resilient people are when faced with the truth.
Yeah.
I think we have, I mean, there are people who will be overwhelmed, but life isn't like this or that. Life is a spectrum. Everything's like a rainbow, a spectrum. You'll have people on all points of the spectrum. You've got to tell the truth, though. From a Māori worldview, you need tika and pono and aroha. You need three things. You need tika, correctness, what is right, legitimate, credible. You need pono, which is integrity and truth. If you don't tell the truth, you're telling lies, and you're just building more illusion on top of illusion. That's why you must tell the truth. And sometimes the truth is hard. And thirdly, you've got to have aroha, which is compassion and understanding, tolerance, patience, all those sorts of things. But you must have all three. If any leg of that is missing, you will get unintended consequences from like telling the truth if you don't have aroha. And by aroha, I mean structurally, like we need systems in place to help people deal with the truth mentally. Like mental illness, I don't know if you guys know.
A lot of them here have mental illness.
Yeah, me too, so we're in good company. Yeah, but seriously, I mean, we've got a lot of mental illness, suicide and stuff going on in the world. In our country, in the OECD, in the developed nations, New Zealand is top of the bag.
That's what bothers me, because
it bothers me too.
Yeah, because we're in a situation where we've got the highest rates of suicide for 15 to 19-year-olds,
yeah.
And that a lot of that's around the pressures of societies. So if we add another pressure by saying, well, actually you've got no future, having no future equals being depressed. You know what I mean? So I mean, can we deliver that message? Maybe can we somehow be tika, but also. Yeah, the tika and the hara have to go together. Huh?
Yeah, and the
so how do we do that? Like if you come back to our trust to communicate with people, the necessity for change, without actually, as you say, scaring the horses, how do we do that?
I think part of it too is telling the truth is one thing, but then you've got to have all those, like I say, structures in place to support people, because they're going to deal with it in different ways. Some people are going to go, all right, I'm up for the biggest challenge of my life. I knew I was mortal when I was born. It's not news that I was going to die when I was born. I knew that. We all knew that, right? So that's not news. The news is, maybe it's the time frame of my life is now a little bit more compressed than I imagined it was when I was born. And I want to make the most of my life. And I want to go out like in a blaze of glory, with persisting to the very, very last breath that I have, because I'm an amazing being of this universe, and I derive from the gods. I don't know about your guys, cultural beliefs and worldviews, but from my culture, we descend from gods. We descend from the source, the very beginning, before there was even time and space. I don't know if you know Papatuanuku, Ranginui, but before Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother, Ranginui, the Sky Father, there was Io Matua Kore, Io, the parentless one. And there's a whole backstory, a whole backstory, too much to tell you in this short time. But this is the other side of it, the spiritual strength of people. And let's face it, this is why we're in this mess in the first place. Consumeristic values, materialistic values, disconnection from nature, like nature's out there and somehow people are over here. The truth is we're a part of nature. We're not separate from nature. But all that sort of spiritual side of us has led to this consciousness that has just devolved. We need to get our consciousness evolving and restore, our spirit, because we're spirits first, essentially, and we're this meat suit, molecular, whatever you call this apparatus, second. We're having the human experience. And science is showing us the same thing. What I love about today, what I love about this moment is how ancient spiritual wisdom says this: indigenous wisdom and knowledge, traditional knowledge, is saying this, and they're kind of saying the same stuff. Science, the laggards, coming in really late, and in their own language saying the same thing. They're all converging, like this big bang is going to happen. And so we can triangulate the different narratives using different language, but they're actually all saying the same thing, which we are really powerful spiritual beings, And we need to like lean into that and fortify ourselves emotionally. There needs to be a component of work that builds in our emotional fortitude so we can face the challenge. Because quite frankly, people think we have a choice. Well, I can choose to like, use hopium kind of language and hope we never... No, you don't have a choice because birds are falling out of the sky. Have anyone noticed, are you guys old enough to remember a time when you drive in a car and you get all this bug splat on your windscreen? Yeah. You don't now. Does that disturb you? Because it should. When the insects go, we are screwed. Yeah. That's one thing. One thing. So we need to, the point is you can't avoid telling the truth because it's everywhere now.
So
you've got to tell the truth.
How do we tell that truth? I mean, if you were to, so for example, we use a website as a one way of communicating to the people of Taitokoro. How do we do that? How do you think we shift that narrative now without,
Well, I think part of it is we have to think like you have to emulate nature. The problem with humans is we like to think we can beat nature at our own game and we can't. So let's go back to emulating nature. What is one thing that we know about nature? She is so diverse, so deep and broad and complex and stuff. So let's not think narrow-mindedly about communicating this. Some people like to listen to podcasts and they get it that way. Some people like this sort of face-to-face experience. Some people like groups. Some people like just leave me alone on my own and I'll process it on my own. Thank you very much. Videos, whatever. Yeah. We need to think of the different ways that we can communicate like this. And I also think we've got a great structure already in place in this country. It's called the school system. So our curriculum from the very, primary school needs to be fit for purpose. And just like when babies are born into the world, you can't start shoving a 3-course steak meal down their throat, right? They've got to start with milk and they move on to, foods and so on. So we have to do that slowly, seed ideas from the very early ages of children so that you sort of nudge them and you normalize this idea that we're in a very serious critical... It's actually hospice. Some people have actually used the framing, Earth is in hospice right now. So, and here's the other thing. People are amazing. People who need to use hospice services, their courage... right up to the end, the way the family rallies around them, it's kind of the micro situation of where the planet is today.
That's a good analogy.
Give people this sort of understanding that the Earth is in hospice, okay? It's something that is life and death. It's all a part of the whole. You've got to have... And there are some religions that think about deliberately in a faith sort of based sort of framework. They think about their mortality daily, and they do that to appreciate life. And it's not like a scary thing. It doesn't create mental illness in their population of like Eastern religion or anything. It's just appreciating life because we're mortal. There are some ways we can explore the framing of it, but the precedents, what I'm saying is there are precedents in the world already that provide examples and models of how we can take the micro conversation and make it macro. But what I reiterate the point that we don't have a choice about this. We don't have a choice. We think we do, but we actually don't. We've got to do this.
Well, I feel a little bit better. I think that maybe part of the message is we've got to find different ways of communicating, and maybe it's different ways to different people. Yeah. And maybe the harsher messages probably need to come face to face too. I don't know.
Is it we've never been here before. I've certainly never been here before, except I talk about this with some of our senior citizens in New Zealand who have a memory of the World War I and II times, right? That was freaky. That was scary. That was traumatic. We still have people today that are carrying trauma from the wars. World War I, II, Vietnam. So we know humanity is up for the challenge of facing existential crisis. We know it already. So they have actually had conversations. They have mobilised. In New Zealand, in every country, we mobilise. We went, right, we're going to change our diet because we no longer have the import-export, normality. We've got to eat offal and whatever. They went back to eating organs of animals and stuff. People would never. We made clothes out of curtains because we just didn't have the textiles to go out shopping conveniently and just buying clothes. You had to have a sharing economy. You had to support your neighbour. You had to pull together.
In fact, everyone had a garden.
You gardened.
Yeah.
You had to up your game in terms of self-sufficiency as much as possible, and yet be not independent but interdependent is more stronger than independent. Okay? So there's a lot we can learn from our past, and from a Māori worldview, that's why we're always saying, look to the past when you're here, because the past is rich with teachings and learnings. So we have to do that again.
So look, we've got Eloise here, who's been, this class is all about transformation and change.
Yes.
And I don't know, in terms of the change processes, what do you think about this conversation, Eloise?
Well, Catherine, it's amazing, just listening to you. I've been reading about that report, and even, it's true what you say, they've taken the report and they've actually condensed it into a summary report, which has gained the agreement. They had to change it significantly from the report just to get all the contributors to actually agree to put that report out. So what you're saying is true, because even from the actual IPCC, we're getting a watered down version. Yeah. And we've just watched a video from Al Jazeera about the whole the fact that we've had these floods all around the world, and maybe only once out of 127 times was the connection made between what was happening and climate change. Yeah. And but as part of this class, we learn about the different processes, like Cotter's 8-step theory on change and things like that. Creating urgency, a sense of urgency, is actually his number one thing.
I'd love to know more about that.
And stick around. And so just trying to get that, within this 12-year time frame, we talk about change, taking incremental change, and people having resistance to change, but actually 12 years is just a blink of an eye, really. So how do we create that sense of urgency? We have companies that are sort of doing their little, CSR with their corporate social responsibility, doing what they think they need to do to look like they're ethical, but what you're saying is that that's just a little bit like, just poking a little hole in
if somebody is seriously sick and they need heart surgery and you give them a sticky plaster, it's not really going to cut the mustard right. When heart surgery is required, that's what you've got to do. But people, business, industry, politicians don't. They've got this wall up and they just can't accept that the change has to be really radical. For example, money. Like in Bolivia, we were talking with the friendly states and saying, I led that conversation. I was like, look, you guys keep saying there's no money to do everything that needs doing. That is a lie, and you know it. Countries are saying, oh no, we can pay money to go to war. We can pay money to bail banks out. We can give tax breaks to the rich. But, when it comes to saving humanity from extinction, we don't have the money for that. I called them out. Now, and those officials, one of them came up to me on one of our breaks and said, look, I'm totally on board with you, man, but I've got this mandate from my government and it's in this box. And what you're saying is way out of the box. And I can't help you. So that's what we have to do. It's people power to force our politicians. We elected them. They're our public servants. We're not their slaves. Why do we let them get away with the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's going to allow corporations to come over here, extract all our natural resource wealth and export it overseas or into the back pockets of obscenely rich people? Hey, good on them for being rich. They gamed a system. Awesome. But the rest of the population is poor and downtrodden and virtually slaves. Now, that's unacceptable. Now, at the same time, our country is having this welfare discussion about reforming welfare, right? That's a really important discussion. We've got a criminal justice system reform conversation going on. That is really important, because the first people to be demonised and criminalised when the pressure starts, building up in countries will be the vulnerables, right? It'll be people with disabilities, people of colour, indigenous peoples, poor people. Their human rights will be violated first. How do I know this? Because I've been tracking this along with my colleagues for a long time, and it's the same pattern everywhere you go. So we have to triangulate these sort of reformist conversations happening in our country and tell the politicians, look, it's all one thing. Climate crisis is the headliner, lens through which we have to do all our policy through now. We've got to somehow get through to them, get that cut through with politicians somehow.
And how do we change that story when we have an electoral system that says, you get in and then you can spend a year doing what you want to do, and then the next 2 years sucking up so that you get elected again. So how can we change that? We've got this 12 years. This is serious. And when we're talking about 1.5 degrees, and people might say, oh, well, what if it's 2? If it's 2, it's only another half a degree. But that's actually just really not telling it like it is it?
No, it's not. I just want to share a thing connected with this. When I went to Bolivia for this conference, right, we landed, there was about 8 of us who came on the same flight. We got in a cab, we went in the direction of our hotel. Bolivia, the city of Cochabamba, where the conference was, there was this massive protest across the whole city. They had blockaded streets, they had vehicles all back to back, so you couldn't drive up and down streets. They had people who were tagging and graffitiing walls in Spanish, I believe. I didn't know what they were saying. But we learnt later that whole protest, and it was supremely mobilised. You had children, you had grandmothers, you had adults, you had young people. They were all out on the street chanting, da 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 da, and they had their signs and stuff. And I was going, whoa, what's going on here? It was because they felt their government was corrupt and wasn't, doing right by the people. Okay. Now, rightly or wrongly, that is what it is. But I thought to myself, wow, I would love that if that would happen here. Honestly, because when your back is up against the wall, ordinary diplomacy ain't really going to cut it. And when you think about all these times in history where we've had major shifts that have, resulted in transformation. Hopefully a lot of it was positive. Yeah, in France, a lot of royalty lost their head over it and whatnot. But, we don't want it to get to that. But we can step it up way more in New Zealand, because, people outside are looking to New Zealand and going, you guys got it sweet. You've got Māori people who are strong, and they've got this treaty that they can leverage with their government, and, everyone's happy, joy, population, they get on, there's multicultural happiness and all this sort of stuff. And I say to them, oh man, are you kidding? I look to you guys as an example, because we're soft over here. We don't know how good we got it. And if we don't stand up soon, we're going to lose everything, because we're just too cruisy in New Zealand. And believe it or not, my Māori history actually comes from guerrilla warfare and stuff. If you think of, when the colonisers came, we stood up and we fought for what we believed in, and we still, lost so much, and we're having to claw it back. But you've got to think, where is the line in the sand? When your life is being threatened, you're not just going to sit there and write letters and say, will you please, sir, can trickle down, can I have some money? No, you're not. You've got children, grandchildren, you've got to fight for them. And women, I'm just going to say, this is our time, because there are more women rising up in leadership. Our men, I love our men. I mean, I don't know you personally, but I'm sure you're a lovely guy. But we're in a bit of a crisis, because the age we've come out of has been very patriarchal. Now, what I mean by men and women, I say that kind of facetiously. It's the energy of the age, right? More masculine, more feminine. It just so happens that, you might happen to have a body and body parts that go with men or women, but not necessarily because there's LGBTQ, so that kind of blows that theory out of the water. What I'm talking about is the energy. We need a more female energy that gets back to Mother Nature, that gets back to connection, gets back to caring, and brings in that courageousness that only a mother, that kind of courage only a mother can have for their children. That's the kind of courage we need to bring to bear now, today, I reckon.
So going back to your analogy about the war, they had hard times in front of them, but there was the promise of victory.
True.
And
Yeah.
so I guess that's the other part of the message, isn't it? Because what I like about the drawdown message is that Paul Hawkins says that this is actually happening for us, and it's a challenge. And if we actually respond to the challenge in the right ways, we'll create a different sort of world, and we'll leave some of those injustices behind.
Yeah.
That's the prize, I guess.
Yeah, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, isn't
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
There's always a light. Sometimes the light is tangible, and sometimes it's more esoteric, intangible, and spiritual.
Yeah.
A guy that I read a lot, he was a pastor of a church or something, and then he went off and he did journalism in those real dangerous areas of the planet where you could get shot and killed, and he saw some horrible atrocities. He worked for the New York Times, and then he opposed one of the policies that America had, and they kicked him out. They retired him because he was a truth teller and a whistleblower. His name is Chris Hedges, and Chris Hedges often uses this quote, I don't fight fascists because I think I will win. I fight fascists because they are fascists. So his light at the end of the tunnel wasn't necessarily there, but he did it anyway. And that's what tika and pono and aroha is about. Tika is about you do what is right purely because it's right. You don't ask the question beyond that, well, maybe I won't succeed. No! You do it because it's right. You do it because it's the integrity sort of thing to do. It's true. You know, you're standing in your truth. It's pono. And you do it because for the love of the people, aroha. That's why you do it. You don't ask if you're going to win or not. Of course you want to plan. Mm-hmm. You want to strategize. You want to, do your due diligence and your risk management, before you put on your war paint or whatever it is you're going to do. I'm actually not an advocate of violence. Let's be clear about that. I like peaceful activities, but I'm just saying there is a point, even Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, they all said there was this line in the sand that you got to make it uncomfortable for everyone out there. The only way people change is when they're uncomfortable and they feel they're...
Yeah, we're too
if you're comfortable, you just keep cruising along. You've got to make it uncomfortable for people. That's the thing. And so when people go, I was involved in a protest in Auckland for the TPP a couple of years ago. We blockaded the whole, middle of the city, and we went out onto the motorway and stopped traffic. And there were people yelling, winding their windows down and going, oh, God, what are you losers? I want to get to where I'm going, all this sort of stuff. They were inconvenienced for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. But the payoff, if they just listened, might be a world we can actually live in. Come on, get it right, people. Your priorities. Okay, a little bit of inconvenience, front-loaded, a lifetime of joy and bliss. Hey, it's not really a competition, is it? So that's sort of the way we've got to think about these things. You've got to inoculate yourself against the false narrative that people put out there, like, you bludgers, you protesters. No, we're the ones who are saving life. That's what we are.
So I guess that leads us now to think about how that applies to change in organisations and things like that, and we can maybe... Yeah, so thanks very much, Catherine. That was awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome. Were there any questions?
Yeah, I think we'll turn the camera off and have some questions.
Cool.
Yeah, cool.
I just want to say thank you for allowing me to come in here and hang with you guys and just vent. I don't know if you notice, it's kind of venting, as well as, sharing perspectives. And I learn a lot. So if you got questions, just assume I'm going to learn a lot from your question, because I always do. I love it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Catherine. We were just talking this morning about being energised after this class. Rahul was saying he gets energised with this class. Well, you're just going to be about here, at this level now. You're going to walk out of the class. Really? It's going to sustain you through to Friday afternoon, no problem at all.